Mr. Chris Penny.
Thanks, guys. How's everybody doing? All right. Thanks for being here. I'm going to kind of jump into it really quick. Just very quickly, you may have known me from, certain bands as Dillinger, Escape Plan, Coheed and Cambria I'm with now. I have a lot of other side projects that I do. One of them is called Return to Earth, which I'm going to play a track from. Another one is called Fight Mannequins, which is a production company that I do with some friends of mine. And I'm just going to basically kind of show you right now some of the different things that I listen to when I'm not doing Coheed or, those full-time touring bands. I mean, these are bands that tour 8, 9, 10 months out of the year. So it's very, very hard for me to be in one place, and a lot of these guys, we're always traveling, that sort of thing. So nowadays we use technology as much as we possibly can, or at least I do, to, our advantage to write. I'm very, very big on writing. Just besides playing drums, I think it's very, very important to be a writer, and be involved in everything that is involved with this and outside, because this is just a fraction of what you are a part of, you know what I mean? Plenty of people playing bands, that sort of thing, you may just want to do it all on this, that's fine, whatever your preference is. For me, it's all about doing a lot of things, and not trying to spread myself thin, but just I want to tackle and challenge myself to do a lot of different things. Sometimes too much stuff at one point and then burn myself out, but anyway. So the first thing I'm going to do for you right now is basically a side project band, Return to Earth. The song is called Back of My Hand. It's just kind of a straight ahead rock tune with some loops and that sort of thing. And you just kind of check it out and see what's going on with that. All right? Thank you.
Take
You guys can hear me all right? Okay, cool. So, with that track, for me, a thing that I've been doing lately, given where I came from, like I went to Berkeley for a couple years, studied there, did a lot of synthesis there. That was my major, doing music technology, that sort of thing. So I've always had this fascination with loops and, software and all that stuff. And now it's kind of really blown up. And, I use programs like Reason and Native Instruments Contact, all that stuff. And basically, this tune and this whole record that we just did it on our own. We self-produced it. And I think the amazing thing now with the technology is that you can pretty much do everything on your own. There's the whole thing with studios and stuff like that. I think it's a great thing. I think it's great. But now, you can just pick up a program and just sit down and just give it a little tender loving care and a little know-how. You make your own records. You know what I mean? I think that's so important, is where things are going, and have been going. So for me, it just started with like a simple drum loop and then like an arpeggiated piano pattern, that sort of thing, and then we just kind of let it, go from there. And we wrote that whole tune, myself and the two guys that are in this project, this band. We wrote it when I was overseas. I was over in Europe and, just trading files back and forth, and then we, finally finished the tune and the record. So it's very, very important to me. And, what I was getting back to is a very important thing that I've learned from where I've, came from, playing in a band like Dillinger, where there was a lot of busy patterns, a lot of things going on, a lot of, throwing fives and sevens and all these things like into these, time signatures. And I've, made the shift over to Coheed. And with Coheed, it's a little bit more of a straightforward thing, bang it out. And I'm learning, with this band where I'm kind of like picking and choosing how to mix and match, just like laying it down, kind of grooving, and then knowing where to kind of, throw things in here and there and that sort of thing. So that's kind of like where my head's at with that, just really learning like how to really just lay into the groove, that sort of thing, The next thing I'm gonna do is gonna be like an orchestral track, and I'm gonna play along to it. And basically what this entails, again, with the whole technology thing, is there's this program called Vienna Symphonic Library, and what this program is, basically, it's a comprehensive library of over like 500 gigs of orchestral samples with every articulation that you could possibly imagine. And so what a buddy of mine and I did is we just kind of sat down and we wrote this piece. It's a little zany, a lot of, odd meters, that sort of thing. But I think it sounds, the thing I'm so amazed by what this program does is that it's very, very realistic. It's as close as you could possibly get. And I think the amazing thing about it, and like what I was saying before, about being, just taking it outside of the realm of just playing this instrument, is that when you dive into it and you get into all the articulations and everything that's going on with this program, you really kind of learn a little bit of like what's going on inside of, a string player's head or like a, a horn player's head without, I don't really, I don't have the time to like sit there and like work things out with those kind of guys. You know what I mean? I wish I did. Maybe in the future, or I'll write stuff like this and then maybe be able to commission people to come and do it. That's my dream, to do it one day. But the track is called "The Glass Ceiling," and I'm just gonna play along to it. All right. All right. So that was just something a little different. I wanted to take something like in a heavy context, but just still like orchestrate it like on, like technically on the strings or, synth or however you want to say. I don't know. I just feel like, the most important thing is just, trying to just get, as much knowledge as you can about anything that, deals with music, not just drums, If it's out there, you can do it. And I think, the main thing too, the most important thing is that I feel like anything is possible. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I hate when like people say, oh, well, it's just this or this guy's this guy's that. Like, you can do anything that you want. And like, I think it's funny when people are just like, oh yeah, like, he's not this or he's not that. You know what I mean? Just go ahead and do it, I always like, the most ridiculous things it may seem like to you at the time, or like, even when anybody says at the time, things happen, and they work. And if you believe in it, I always feel like that stuff will always, come to fruition and turn out. So don't ever give up on that. I feel like I'm a living testament to that, because I came from absolutely nothing, man. The homeless, living homeless, that sort of thing, and just, always wanted to play music. This is what I wanted to do. So, and I'm up here doing it. So I think that's psyched. Thank you, guys. All right. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to kind of get into a quick little lesson. And basically, I'm going to kind of get into something about how I feel time, or how I'm going to play with time. I'm really big into like messing with polyrhythmic ideas, or multiple meters, modulation, that sort of thing. You can go and get my book, which is actually out on the merch table back there, which is called Polyrhythmic Potential, and I did that book with Joe Bergamini, who's been a great friend of mine, and we worked on that book together. So give him a hand, yeah. So that book deals with some very simple ideas, basically just how to, construct playing different rhythms against one another, and how, certain things line up, and, how they play off one another. And, if you want to play something that's in, 4, and you play something in 5 against it, then you can, modulate and go to 5, or, so on and so forth. So a simple exercise that I'm going to do is something that basically deals with either, 4 over 5 or 5 over 4. And so what I have here on my kick drum, I'm going to play it with all the notes played with the accents, and then I'm going to take the notes away so you hear like what the core rhythm is. So basically, what I have here on the kick drum, I'm going to play 5 groups of 4 notes. So that'll be 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, 5 E and a. All right? Simple. And then I'm going to play 4 groups of 5 notes, on the snare drum. So it'll be 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, 5 E and a. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 3, 4, 5. 4, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right? So it goes like something like this, putting them together. I'm just going to use just single strokes right now. All right, so that's like the basic rhythm right there. That's a chord. So you have together, and then what happens is that note keeps moving over a 16th note until they finally resolve. So you have 1, E, E, and 4, the 5, 1. 1, 1, 2, E, 3, and 4, 5. So on and so forth. So you could just, basically learn And then you know, from doing it so much, you learn that you can reverse them, so on and so forth. I mean, you could play, you know, flip it to the snare, kick plays what the snare just played, so on and so forth. You can also, you know, start filling in the rest, create beats, all sorts of things. One thing I like to do is take this rhythm and then start adding like some double kick stuff in there, so something like this. There's all sorts of things you could do with it. I mean, you could do that, and then you could kind of create the illusion, like with your hi-hat, like, you know, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 5 E and then create like a sort of backbeat with it. So, like, without playing it with the hi-hat, it would just sound like a straight backbeat like this. Then I'll add the hi-hat in. Back and forth, so, you know. You know, that sort of thing. So there's like, once you learn one of those things, you could just, you know, you can use it many different ways. It's just kind of up to your own creativity and messing around with it to come up with the ideas. And then, you know, like a simple modulation from there would just kind of be like, you know, if I'm here, I could just go straight to 4, you know, that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of different ways, you know, you could do. Yeah, I mean, you know, not only for 5, you know, 5, 6, 7s, 9s, you know. You can just run the table with all that stuff, you know? And then the other fun thing, with all that is then when you start working in stickings into all that, instead of just single strokes or outlining the chord pattern, you know, you could throw 5, I'll throw like a 5 sticking in. I'm gonna do this in a little bit, but I'll outline it here. I'll keep the kick drum in 5, you know, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And I'm gonna outline the sticking with that, playing, I'll just play it on the snare right now. Right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right, right, left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Hold on. Let me get a boom real quick. So something like this. So the sticking is this. All right, if I change the accents like every 3 notes within that pattern. All right, so now you have like 3/5. So you could do that. You could throw 4 against it, you know, 6, 7, and so on. And eventually what happens is, if you start playing ostinatos on your feet against it, you can just start like mixing meters and changing meters and changing the feel of the patterns, but the sticking stays the same. So it's a pretty smooth transition into what you're doing. So something like this. I'll stay with the same hand pattern, and I'll mimic it with my feet. So right, left, right, right, left, right, left, right. All right? So on and so forth. So it just depends, you know, on what you want to do. I think the most important thing with some of these ideas is just you can take any sticking and wherever the accents kind of lie, and once you know how those patterns work and play off one another, then that whole world's pretty limitless, all right? So I think what I'm gonna do, excuse me, is kind of, I'm just gonna do like a little rough solo with some of that, and it's gonna involve a lot of modulations, doing stuff from like 7 and then 3/7 and going into like a shuffle type of thing, and I'm just gonna play with the time a lot throughout this whole solo. So I don't know, we'll just see what happens. So thank you. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.
We're gonna get down. We'll try to do a combination between a fish fry and a whoop-ass convention, because that's what like Rob likes to see. Fish fries and whoop-ass.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sean Pelton and House of Diablo.
Y'all, this is fun being here. Thank you so much. You know, I had this sound about what, you know, when they say more cowbell, and it was like, how big a cowbell can you get? So to try the beer keg. Then I thought, what would a big güiro, like if the Taco Bell dog was chilling out and he wanted a big güiro, if I took a washboard and put it on it, it'd be an El Grande güiro. And you know, duct tape, who invented this stuff, man? We need to, this saved everybody's life with duct tape. I might need some more, though. I hope she holds. Then we're gonna get down, this is one called First We Tango, Then We Fall in Love. So, check it out. About 6 weeks ago, I had this dream, and in this dream, this vision, this cat came to me in a dream, and he was kind of a cross between, he looked like Yoda from Star Wars and Einstein combined. So it was like Yoda's head and then some gray hair, and he had a headband, kind of like a burnt-out drummer dude, had a long earring, and he said to me in a dream, he said, "Little grasshopper, try to say something intelligent at this thing." I said, "That's so hard with my little drummer pea brain. I don't know if I can." So he said, "Look, don't worry about it. I'm going to send a Chinese wizard, and he's going to have this tablet of wisdom for you to show the people, and that'll be that." I said, "Man, you're crazy." And then I thought I'd been partying too hard the night before. I didn't think about it, but then all of a sudden, a Chinese wizard came in the shape of my drum tech. He showed up, and it's kind of got a tablet of stuff that they delivered from China via FedEx. All right. That's good. So, it was crazy. It ended up being Yoda Einstein's nuggets of wisdom. I said, damn, this is crazy. And it was about getting a gig, not losing the gig once you get one, and then actually getting called back for more gigs. Imagine that. So the first thing he wanted me to do is ask you guys to look into your hearts as drummers and ask yourself, are you a pain in the ass? I mean, y'all, I like that we are crazy dudes, but somehow we got a reputation out there. I was online, man, y'all probably seen that thing about getting fined, drummers fines, and all musicians think this is funny as hell, too. Like the thing, like, if you show up with a gig with the 48 Chinese gong, like to your club date, you have the gong, that costs you like $100, and then if you bring the 2 timpani to go with it, you owe them $200. You know, like, where did we get this reputation? I guess we did it a couple times, and so anyway, you're a pain in the ass if you're the cat that says to the club owner's wife that she has nice tatas. So, you know, that kind of drummer stuff. And then in the studio, you know, it's just common sense. Like, just be on time and have your gear together. And don't be a pain in the ass. Okay, we're gonna keep moving. Number 2 was, can you take direction? And this has, like, in the studio, if you're working on a track or something, can you have a little girl that's 12 with an acoustic guitar tell you that she wants the drum beat to be like this, and you know it should be the other way, and are you cool with that? It's just wild how you gotta have a certain temperament if you're gonna work a lot. Can you take direction? Dig it. Okay, that's a tough one. Then, do you have ideas for drum parts? This is interesting. Like, you know, there's like so many amazing drummers, and then once they get in the studio, sometimes artists look for ideas to them for ideas. Like, you know, take a song like "Come Together," like that drum part, man, that is wild. You know, like, who thought of that? Because it could have just been doom, doom, da, da, da. So, like, it's interesting. There's times where artists in the studios and stuff like that will want you to have ideas and come to table with stuff. And then that's a whole nother muscle of, like, beyond, you know, paradiddles and stuff and into, like, studying records and, like, you know, what did Jim Keltner do on the bridge of that song? That was so interesting. Or how did Lars set up the Metallica thing and this intro, outro, you know? But parts and sounds, because it becomes about that more than maybe burning left foot clave in 13/8 at 700 beats per minute. You know, which is hip, but as far as maybe getting paid and stuff, this having a sensibility for parts is something there. Then, by the same token, do you know how to shut up and not talk about your great part? There's a famous artist who's amazing, and he told a session player friend of mine, he said, "Man, I hate somebody with a good idea." And he goes, "Damn, that was crazy. What did he mean by that?" And what he meant was, as an artist, he hated being at a session and tracking and not even being able to get his vision of the song down first before everybody was chiming in and saying, "Hey, man, well, what about this on the bridge? What about this on the outro?" So anyway, it's wild. This has got a lot of Zen mystery to it, because sometimes it says to have a part, and then other times it's like, do you know when to just shut up and play the drums, baby? Because that's what they want sometimes. They're paying you to do what they need to happen. Sometimes they want on the ideas, sometimes they don't. So kind of having a radar for that kind of thing is a survival skill. Then personality, style, and sound. But here's one of the Zen koans again, or whatever that word is, koan. Transparency, and not a sound and a style, but something that's transparent, because you know what? It's a bummer, but it's not always about us. It should always be about the drums. But sometimes it ain't. It's about the song, it's about the singer, it's about the lyric. So it's wild. This is a two-part thing. Do you have personality? Do you have style? And do you know how to get a sound? And do you know how to make that transparent when it needs to be? Dig it, because it ain't always about us. But it should be. I'm working on it. Okay. So are you flexible? This comes down to flexibility. You know, a lot about working is records are made a million different ways. And there's no right way and wrong way. And man, I've sat through some sessions where I've been like, this is a disaster. This is just never gonna see the light of day. And I swear to God, it's huge. And then I'll be on something that, this is so magic, I can't believe it. And it don't even get released. So this skill about having flexibility with headphones on is amazing. So dig it. There are no rules, just flexibility. Records are made a million different ways. Rule number 1. Time, feel, and groove. But you know, sometimes that don't even matter, because if you're playing some free jazz stuff, they don't want to have any kind of groove or feel implied. I remember I did this gig once with Mose Allison. It was a TV show, and he said to me, look, no hi-hat on 2 and 4. In fact, I don't want any consecutive quarter note to be in time. I was like, damn, man. Because he wasn't just doing some crazy free jazz, he was grooving on his own, but he didn't want the drums to do that at all, and it was crazy. But it was wild, and I did it, and I shut up and did it, and got paid. Yeah, that's it. All right, so pocket and booty shaking. I just want to say, look, my favorite drummers, you know, that tradition of cats who can sit on something simple and just make the walls sweat. And it's like, there can be 30 different drummers maybe playing this pocket, but what do they have that's magic? And that whole thing, and trying to get inside, that's been a big influence on me. There's cats that can sit on something until the roof just explodes and stuff. And it ain't so much sometimes about a lot of notes, although sometimes more is more, and sometimes less is more, or more is less. I don't know, it can go all the different ways possible, you see? That's what's such a mystery. But dig it, I just know when people make my butt shake, that sure does feel good for drums. Okay. The ability to put yourself on the other side of the glass, meaning if you get called for a session, and let's say the producer has 8 dudes he's dealing with, bass, tuba, organ, acoustic, all kinds of crap, and then a singer on top of that, and you're the drummer whining about that you want to try the 10 different snare drums, but the thing is you've only got 2 hours to cut 5 tracks. So this ability to have a radar for what's going on in the studio, know when to speak up, know when to shut up, put yourself in the producer's shoes for a second, wipe your own butt, produce yourself, get the snare drum that you dig. You know what I mean? It's like the kind of common sense about the ability to put yourself in the artist's shoes or the producer's shoes. And sometimes they want to be involved in what you're doing, and other times that's the last thing they want. So it's crazy, it's a mystery, but the bottom line is TCB, just try to figure out how to take care of business, because that's what's going to get you called back. And then finally, we finishing up. Just one of the biggest things, advice I ever heard was, bro, forget about all the craziness, just play from your heart, man. Because people are going to sense that when a drummer plays, man, no matter if it's some crazy stuff or some simple stuff, they're going to sense if you're coming from your heart, if you got a soulful trip about where you're coming from. And all right, Yoda's Einstein's wisdom nuggets. Yeah, I know there was a lot of things that said one thing and then it said the complete opposite, but that's the crazy world we live in under headphones. All right. This is the part of the show where we get sensitive. I'm gonna play with a pair of brushes for about 8 bars. Or something. Oh. And some malice. And you know, that thing about sound is interesting because when I came up, I kind of like jazz stuff, and my drum teachers always was like, you know, you want to have a pure drum sound with an open tone, and Then all of a sudden, people started putting blankets on their drums, and that just mystified me. But I'm gonna try it today, see what happens. Maybe, I think what's gonna happen is it's supposed to deaden the sound down and make the drums more transparent, yet with a spooky personality. Okay, we're gonna end it with the song. After talking about having a good attitude, this is one time when you've taken enough from the people telling you what to do, and you got a song here called Bad Attitude.
Ask me the You think I'm kind of rude? Well, you're goddamn right, I got a bad attitude. I got a bad attitude. Bad attitude. I got a bad attitude. I got a bad attitude. Yeah. Sean Pelton.
Thanks a lot. Brian Mitchell, Zev Katz, Jeff Gollum, Clark Gayton. Really appreciate it. Stick around for Adam Deitch, amazing drummer. Benny, everybody's coming up. Stanton, amazing lineup coming up. All right, hang out. We're gonna party.
Mr. Shannon Forrest.
This is my band, Chronic. This is Craig Young, Chris Rodriguez making the trip with us up here. And thanks everybody for hanging out. What I want to get into today is basically, for me, the whole reason I ever started playing the drums was just groove, feel, listening to music. And that music that makes you feel and move, So what I want to do is, I've kind of broken that down for me and this reverence of these great drummers that I love. There's key points to me that define what those guys' time and feel are made of. And I want to demonstrate kind of those four things. And we're going to play some instrumental bits to demonstrate some of that. So I'll show some things on the kit and then play some with the band. And that's essentially that. And then if you guys have any questions, if you want to know anything about the insight into what's going down in the studio and some things that you could do to be prepared for that, then we can cover that. But essentially, the groove and time and that development of that is really what'll get you through that door anyway. So in that breakdown for me of what makes a certain guy kind of have his unique quality and how he plays time, it's beat placement for me, which is where your entire groove sits relative to the other musicians in the band, whether you play to the front side of the beat or to the back side of the beat. And it varies for different styles of music, There's certain things that work right for each genre. And then within that, there's your interspacing, which is where your backbeat lays relative to your bass drum. So if it's in 4/4, it's 2 and 4 relative to 1 and 3. 6/8, it would be 1 and 4, that kind of thing. And the really great drummers that I love, from everybody from John Bonham to Charlie Watts to Jeff Porcaro, Jim Keltner, Steve Gadd, all these guys have very specific, beautiful spacing that is uniquely theirs. Nobody else does it that way. And ultimately, nobody does it the same way. But you can work on things to develop your own ability to manipulate those things to a deeper level. And then past that, then you've got swing, which is interspacing of its own. It's how you time out the distance between your eighth notes or triplets, just the human kind of variation you give to that. And then inner dynamics, the ability to play with a great level of volume difference between the notes within those patterns. And that's essentially what achieves that feel. So I'm just going to try to demonstrate my take on those things and go through each point, and then we'll have some musical examples with the band to go with. So the first thing I'm going to do is get into point one, is just beat placement. I'm going to start with what is home base for me, and then I'm going to move it forward. I'll play like 4 bars, then I'll get kind of up on the beat and back on the beat. That's a real basic take on that. And that just kind of, when you're recording or playing music, different things have a different place that it wants to sit in. And what I run into over the years is, in the studio, maybe I'm playing something that feels good in the headphones, and I go in and listen back, and where I'm playing is too far in the back side of the beat or something. And so the whole thing will sound lethargic, and I'll go back out and try to lean that to the front side to get the right energy, like just the difference between the pocket and, say, something like a Police tune or some punk or ska music, that's going to have a real, leaning forward kind of tension to it, as opposed to an Al Green funky kind of thing that's going to sit way on the backside. And so that's an example of that. And now we'll play a little bit of a Motown sounding inspired kind of piece that just is got to have a snappy pocket to it. If I were to play this laying back, it just wouldn't have the right energy. So. So in something like that, even the fills and things want to be really up on the front side of the beat to get the right kind of energy to it, but it's not rushing or moving ahead tempo-wise. It just leans up. From there, I want to cover a little bit of swing and how that pertains to just playing a straight eighth note groove and moving that stuff around, and even in the shuffle, where you have the inside notes that can be manipulated as well. So I'll play a little piece, and what I'll do is I'll go through real straight eighth notes and start swinging that eighth note. And then I'll stop and I'll play it a shuffle, do the same thing like a halftime kind of thing with the same moving emphasis there. So. So you have straight eighths. So in that, there's a lot of tension that can be created by how much you play around with that eighth note and where it falls. And then also, it pertains to even shuffle grooves, because swing, it kind of implies that broken triplet, kind of beat. But within how you subdivide inside a triplet, for me, also swings one way or the other. You can play it farther toward a 16th note or farther toward an eighth note and change the way that feels. And even mess with, in a halftime sense, like a Bernard Purdie. Anybody familiar with Bernard Purdie, Jeff Porcaro? And I'll go specifically into, I grew up on that stuff. That's what I love to play, and probably spent more time than anything learning to play that beat. And there, after have not had the opportunity to record it very much. You don't hear it very often, But I'll go into kind of my breakdown of what's going on with those two versions of playing that groove and the difference in how you can swing that and get a whole different feel. And so the first, I'll play just kind of a straight version of it. And then the second will be to demonstrate. You would have the first and last note of a triplet, dot, 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 right, building that beat. The middle eighth of that triplet, is typically in that style played as a ghost note on the snare drum. Let's say Bernard Purdie's take, and I hope he doesn't mind me talking about it, is more, I've sat across from from him this far and watched him do it, and it's kind of random in his own way, so you can never recreate it, but it's more of a 16th note triplet inside that beat, so it kind of creates a different kind of swing and loop to the same beat. So here that would be. That's one of my favorite beats to play. It's just a fun beat to play, the hand-to-hand stuff, connecting. So we got a little instrumental, just kind of jam that we've got that we'll play to demonstrate that, and maybe just taking it out a little bit, playing fills within that groove, and so on. So here we go. Thank you. Thank you. So that's one way to play that. Another thing is playing your fills to me, simplified fills, and giving them a certain emphasis beyond just trying to make things notey, because in contemporary music, pop, rock, whatever, country, there's not a lot of space for just ripping things off. So to really make fills have a certain importance and energy getting you through transitions and tunes. So I'll play kind of a little bit of a beat and play a real straight version of a simple snare drum fill, and then just play it with some feel, with some intent. And then I'll get into a little bit of kind of what I use as practice physically to just control that inner dynamic and those subtleties of time and how it pertains to these fills. So this first thing will just be just a real simple snare drum fill, but the difference between playing it and really meaning it and just sitting here and playing some notes, Thanks. So the second being, obviously, it's all about that inner dynamic, because it's the same notes, it's the same simple phrase. But when you hear those things played, with some deeper expression, then they're great. They're timeless at that point, A lot of the great drummers that we all have grown up on or listened to have a certain vocabulary of fills they play. It's their musical stamp. But every time they play that fill, it sounds fresh and new in whatever musical setting it is, because they mean it every time. It's never just notes going by. So it's important to do that. And so the other thing is for me, practicing, and the way to develop that control of those subtle things that pertain to groove and those fills are, it's really, for me, I can't just practice time to improve my time. Once you get to a point, it's about physical control, beyond what you're going to hear me play, but it's what I practice to try to get those things together. And doing that, I do, I just pick up on things that I hear other drummers do that I like from a GAD thing or whatever, and just make a little practice exercise out of that to either work on bass drum, foot control, to be able to have that inner dynamic, to be able to go, to get a lot of distance and volume between those notes, which leads to that feel and pocket. And so there's no amount of practicing that groove for me that gets me any farther along with that. I have to kind of push out beyond what I'm going to use musically in any setting that I usually play in, but it's more of a physical exercise at that point, and it's what strengthens that. So I'll show you a couple things that I do, just little exercises to try to keep that wrist and hand and foot control together. And then we'll play something that will demonstrate some of those fills that you'll never hear me play on anybody's record. So, I mean, things like, the GAD, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff, and just repetitively, or I'll pick a phrase. Stuff like that, and just stuff that keeps the muscles moving, and keeps building that kind of stuff up. And then for bass drum technique, I've got an exercise that I do that's so it's really fast stuff that I work on, just to be able to play that 16th note into a downbeat the way I want it to feel, And like I say, for me, I've not been able to play that groove enough to get any better control of that note without having to really do some things that physically burn, really get that control, of the notes. I'm going to play one tune, one little instrumental thing that's going to focus around those simplified fills, just giving space to things and inner dynamic to the fills to make them kind of have an explosiveness. Then we'll play a real up-tempo thing that demonstrates some of the other things and see if I can get through that. So this will be a minor jam. Thank you. And so the next thing we'll do is be a real up-tempo thing that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for swinging things. It's just moving along so quick. But still try to give that backbeat wherever it lays some emphasis and weight to it, even in a faster tempo. And also, this particular thing is a version of kind of playing time around a riff where it's never a traditional 2 and 4. It's kind of in a Zeppelin sort of sense, but in a different kind of thing. It's my interpretation of how to play to the guitar riff and what that is. So here, check it out. Anybody got any questions?
Do you do a lot of sight reading in the studio?
Sight reading in the studio.
Yeah.
Not much anymore.
Really?
And I mean, part of, you know, as far as getting into the studio, and I'll touch on that briefly, it's all about being prepared, you know, and there's no way to really prepare yourself for a circumstance that you have to be in to learn from, you know. So you have to do as much, you know, work on the front end, and that just really, if you want to get into the studio and experience those kind of things, it's just about pursuing music, you know, and growing as a musician all the time. And every story I ever heard about anybody that I ever liked that got into the studio, they were asked in because somebody saw him playing live. So just remember that it comes from being outside, because the studio is not a particularly conducive place to develop creativity. You got to kind of come that day with things, you know, that you're armed with to use, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for finding new things. You got to do that on your own time and playing live. But as far as the reading goes, you know, that's a definite thing that you need to prepare yourself for. You know, orchestral dates and things like that. You just never know what that first call is going to be, so you need to be prepared. But it's not certainly not pervasive these days. I have to read, but what I'm reading are chord charts with symbols, kind of shorthand kind of things that people develop. Although I just did a session with I think my friend is here, a couple of weeks ago, where it was the most intense reading I've done in 10 or 15 years, and I had to write it all out. And we had a certain amount of time to get these kind of progressive rock tunes with a lot of movement and a lot of odd time signature kind of transitions and things. And if I wouldn't have been able to write it out, I would have had to sit there and memorize it and learn it, and we just didn't have that kind of time. So you do need to have that if you're wanting to get into the studio.
And as far as like the artists you work with, do they heavily dictate as far as grooves you play for certain songs, or?
No, almost never. But you know, I think getting that call is based on kind of the work you've done, and so no, that's all pretty instinctive. You know, most of the time we're working from a demo anyway, which is a full production, full band demo where you know, they've already gone in the studio with the songwriter and a band and recorded the song, so it's all laid out there. I will say a lot of times, almost never do I take away from that demo what I end up playing. You know, I mean, subtle changes in the bass drum pattern, or whether it's hi-hat in this section, or ride cymbal, or fills. You know, but yeah, it's left on the players most of the time. Got another one right here?
Yeah. I didn't have any experience at all with country music.
Yeah.
And one of the first bands I was in, I was more into like jazz and big band swing.
Yeah.
And they would ask me to play some of these country swing tunes.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't do it. Whatever I was doing, the way I was placing the beat or whatever,
Right.
wasn't cutting it. Could you tell me kind of the difference?
Well, yeah, the difference, I mean, are you talking more like Western swing? Was it older country music, or just current?
No, it was older. It was a woman doing a Elvis Presley show.
Oh, okay. Well, it would depend on the drummer who that was, but some of those guys back in that era they all came from the big band swing side of things. Buddy Harman and some of the guys that were playing on those records. You know, it's more it's square in a way. You know, it's not as floating necessarily as you would play that beat in a jazz construct. You know, it's going to be real heavy to the 1 and 3, which you almost never imply in a jazz setting. You know,
Could you play a little of the difference?
Well, it becomes, which is good, because this is the next thing I was going to play. It leads real well into this. It comes from that jazz cymbal beat, you know. But in the country sense, you take all the subdivision out. You know, you're not going to hear it, and then it becomes about playing with a certain measure of heaviness, weight to it. You know, the guy that I think plays that best in a modern context is Eddie Bayers. He's got a way, if you guys know who he is, of playing those kind of things, where it's simplified, but it's great. You know. So I mean, I think I know what you're talking about as far as that beat goes. And let's see.
Right. So it doesn't quite swing as much.
Right. It gets squared off some, because it's about the other things. There's usually a guitar kind of mimicking the same rhythm. That particular beat is one of my favorite, not the way I just played it, but one of my favorite beats to play. And it's derived from that jazz cymbal beat. And one thing I could say too, when you, as far as the questions about how to develop this time and groove and whatever, there's a lot to be learned from watching a guy's posture and his physical movement. It's not real straight. One thing that was a complete. When I saw Jeff Porcaro play this particular beat, his arm was essentially moving just the opposite of what I thought. So instead of pulling out of the beat, go one and da da two, and like this, he was playing into the downbeats, into the quarter notes, which keeps the notes tend to disappear sometimes, the in-between notes, and emphasizing the opposite way ramps those notes differently so that inside a rhythm section, you'll still hear every one of those hi-hat notes instead of it's that kind of thing. It's leaning in. So the next thing we'll play for you is just a little up-tempo shuffle thing that'll go in between on that particular beat, showing you just the ride cymbal version of it, a halftime kind of contemporary take on that groove, which I love to hear Jeff Porcaro and, again, Bernard Purdie play. It seems like those two guys just own every version of a shuffle, And then just into the double time version of a real. So I'm just going to go in three versions of that same beat within the same time signature and tempo, but just doubling up or cutting the tempo in half. And again, the emphasis being on when I'm playing the halftime stuff, with the band, check out where where my hand is moving, and that's why it feels that way. And so when you see other guys doing it, if you like what they're doing, pay close attention to all that stuff, because that's. It's really not just landing on the notes. If you want to really know what they're doing, you gotta see how they're moving around it.
please welcome Mr. Daniel Glass.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mike. So how's everybody doing on a Saturday morning? We've got to get some energy in this room. So I have gathered you here today on a Saturday morning at 10 a.m., and we're going to talk about shuffles. Now, shuffles. Probably most drummers hear the term. They know something about it. But you know, there's probably a lot of confusion about just what exactly is a shuffle and what, when do you use a shuffle and how do you use a shuffle and what's it all about. So I'm going to give it up to you guys for a second. When I throw out the word shuffles, what comes to mind? Bernard Purdie. What else? What? Jeff Porcaro. Okay, what about triplets? Very, very good. Anything else? Any styles? What's that? Funk time shuffle? Okay, good. So a lot of different ideas and conceptions, and people associate shuffles with different things. Maybe a lot of people think about the blues when I talk about shuffles. But what I'm here today to express to you guys is that the shuffle is an extremely important groove for you as drummers to know about. And believe it or not, regardless of whatever style of music that you play, the shuffle is probably involved in some way with that, is probably at the heart of that groove. Now you may say, well, I'm a death metal drummer. I play double bass. What does the shuffle have to do with me? I'm a funk drummer. What does the shuffle have to do with me? Well, what I'm going to do today is talk about all that stuff. So the shuffle is, as someone mentioned, it's based in triplets. Okay, so if you imagine a bar of triplets, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, right? If you take out the middle partial of those 3, you're left with 1, let 2, let 3, let 4, let 1. Okay, and there you go. You've created a shuffle groove, right? So that's sort of your basic shuffle. And as I said, you know, just a couple minutes ago, the shuffle is kind of at the heart of a lot of the most important grooves and at the evolution of a lot of the styles that we play today. Now, based on what we just talked about, why do you think that is? Well, if you think about a shuffle and the fact that it's the first and third partial of a triplet, you kind of have this long-short combination. Long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. Now, when you think about that, it kind of has this movement to it, right? Da, 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 da. And what you can think about like a horse galloping, dun, da, dun, da, dun, da, dun, or like an egg rolling downhill, dun, da, dun, da, dun. And it implies motion, okay? It implies motion and movement. And when this feel started to show up in American popular music, people liked that forward motion, that bouncing, what we call syncopated motion. And it got them excited, and it made them want to dance, okay? So shuffles make people want to dance. And this is something that I talk about all the time in my clinics when I talk about drum history, is that your job as drummers is to make people dance. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of style of music that you're playing, whether it be, you know, jazz and people are just sitting there moving like that, or if it's, you know, hip hop and people are dancing, or whether even if it's, you know, death metal, like, and, you know, people are headbanging. I mean, that is our job as drummers, is to get people moving. And one of the ways you're going to learn how to get people moving is to get hip to shuffles, okay? Now, as I mentioned, the shuffle, this bouncy feel kind of evolved around the same time as at the beginnings of American popular music. Early jazz down in New Orleans, ragtime, it all sort of started to come around at that point. But it wasn't until the mid-30s, during the swing era, the big band era, that shuffles really started to become prominent. And they became prominent in a style called boogie woogie, okay? Now, most of you guys have heard the term boogie woogie. Maybe you know a little bit about what a boogie woogie groove is. Boogie woogie is a style that was created on a piano originally. And the boogie woogie part has to do with the left hand, and the piano player's left hand, and they're kind of going dumba 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 dum, right? That's kind of familiar to everybody, right? So that's the shuffle that was happening in the left hand. And big bands got into this, and of course, why? Because it made people dance. People like that heavy feel. So as we move into the 1940s and the big band era comes to an end, it became too expensive to take big bands out on the road anymore. So people still wanted to have that heavy feel, but now you had to do it with a small band. So therefore, that allowed the rhythm to come out and be more pronounced because they had to fill up that space. And the style that the shuffle really became the heart of is a style called jump blues, which became popular in the 1940s. It was an offshoot of the swing era. And the main artist of the jump blues period was a guy named Louis Jordan. Now, I don't know how many of you know that name. Probably not too many people. But if you're familiar with Ray Charles, Chuck Berry, B.B. King, James Brown, all of these guys, Louis Jordan was their #1 influence. So if you want to play like Clyde Stubblefield or Jabbo Starks, the guys that played with James Brown, if you want to play like these great players, you better learn your Louis Jordan and your jump blues, okay? So I'm now going to demonstrate. I'm going to be playing a few different grooves today and using a few different shuffle examples. And I'm going to start with, a boogie-woogie Louis Jordan 1940s kind of a groove. And this is kind of what was starting to be the transition between big band and rock. So you can kind of hear the big band horns happening, and you can kind of hear that it's kind of starting to sound like what we know as being rock and roll. So check it out. Cool. So that is a boogie-woogie, jump blues style shuffle. Now you probably noticed a couple of things about the way I was playing that groove. First of all, I was using the brushes. Now, most people think about a shuffle, they don't think about the brushes, and it's like, wow. And the other thing you probably noticed was that there was no backbeat in that groove, no heavy 2 and 4. It was just bump, ba bump, ba bump, ba bump, ba bump, right? You felt that nice heavy shuffle feel, but it didn't ever get to those backbeats. So the reason the music sounded this way at this period in time is because you have to remember that in the 1930s and 40s and prior to that period of time, there was no PA systems like we have today. There were no microphones all over everything. So, and a drummer was competing with instruments that were acoustic, upright bass, or maybe a tuba, or a clarinet, or a little, cornet. And there's no way that those instruments could compete with a big, heavy drum sound. So drummers had to get this groove going, this nice, powerful pulse, but they couldn't overpower the other instruments. As things progressed through the 1940s, people got more and more excited about this boogie-woogie groove, and they got more into it. And of course, like today, they wanted it louder, faster, heavier, fatter, And so out of jump blues arose what's called early rhythm and blues. And they started around 1948 adding backbeats to the mixture, okay? They finally got amplification together, electric guitar came in, and drummers started to be able to lay down this heavy 2 and 4. So suddenly the music starts to move forward and it gets heavier and it starts to sound like the rock and roll that we recognize today. And sorry, and the music has that feel, like you could tell that kind of had a big band feel to it, right? Well, now we're going to play something a little similar, but it's going to have more of that, like, let's get together on a Saturday night and have a good time party feel. Okay, so this is a late 40s rhythm and blues backbeat shuffle. All right. So you guys feel the rock in that? You see how things are moving from swing to rock and roll? Sorry, it's hot up here. So we can't really talk about the evolution of American popular music without getting into New Orleans, right? You know, most people know New Orleans is the birthplace of jazz, but New Orleans has also been at the cutting edge of every major style that has come about in the 20th century. So you think about rhythm and blues, you think about funk, you think about modern jazz, you think about all these different styles, and even to this day, you know, New Orleans drummers are just everywhere. And they're you know, New Orleans is, you talk about gumbo down there. They're always throwing together ingredients and mashing things up and coming up with great new funky stuff. Everything that comes out of there is funky. Now, when I think about New Orleans, the person that I think of more than anything is a drummer named Earl Palmer. Does anybody know that name in here? Earl was, Earl, because he was from New Orleans, when he would play a shuffle, he would put all these cool kind of New Orleans-y things into it, these really cool kind of marching, second line-y type of grooves and feels, and you know, really made the music feel great. So this next example I'm going to demonstrate is it's a New Orleans style approach to playing a shuffle, like a 1950s New Orleans R&B, similar to what Earl would have played on like a Fats Domino record. Okay, so check it out. Cool. So with that shuffle, what you probably noticed was that it didn't have the same kind of bouncy triplety feel that the other shuffles that I played had, right? It was more this kind of funky, flattened out, groovy, kind of snake-like, creepy crawly thing. And that's, kind of a lot of the vibe that comes out of New Orleans. A little bit of a sales pitch, but the reason I mentioned the book, The Commandments of Early Rhythm and Blues Drumming, is because this is the shuffle's Bible. Okay, Zorro and I worked on this book for 8 years, and it's the culmination of a huge amount of research that I've done and interviews. I've interviewed over 60 legendary drummers, and this book right here is all about the rhythm and blues of the 40s and 50s, and that's all shuffles. So if you're interested in learning more about shuffles and how they relate to rock and all these other different styles, please check this book out, because it'll help you to tie yourself into your tradition, to what came before you, and the reason why you play what you play. So we're talking about ways to manipulate a shuffle. And another great region of the country for rhythm and blues in the 1950s that produced a lot of great shufflers and shuffle feels is Texas, okay? Now, the way that guys in Texas would take a shuffle is that rather than thinking about it as triplets, they would think about it as 16th notes. That's another way to think about a shuffle. So if you imagine 4 16th notes, 1 E and you take the first and the last, the 1 so you have 1, a 2, a 3, a 4. You guys hear that? So it's still shuffling, but it's got this other kind of way of moving the time. So that was a lot of that particular feel. The other thing that they would do, and the other thing you could do with a shuffle, is you can mess around with that second part of the shuffle. So you have ding, da ding, da ding, da ding, da ding, and you can emphasize that. So you could put that on your snare drum, right? You could also put it on your hi-hat. Okay, so you get a lot of cool, interesting ways to kind of tweak your shuffle. So this next tune I'm going to play along with is sort of a Texas-style shuffle. And you'll see that I'm doing a bunch of these things. The shuffle has this more kind of 16th-y feel, and then it's also got a section at the end where I kind of do some stuff with the back side of the shuffle. All right. So, Texas. Now, as we move forward into the 1950s, start to be some changes in rhythm and blues. Some artists came up like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley. These guys weren't the world's greatest musicians, but they had this new crazy kind of energy, because remember, we talking about everything's moving forward. Energy, right? So Little Richard, say, he's a piano player. He would take that boogie-woogie thing on his piano, dum-ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum-ba-dum, and rather than just playing it swung like that, he'd get really manic, and he'd go dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum, right? So Earl Palmer, who played on all the great Little Richard records, or most of them, he would go, well, man, I better on my ride cymbal, too, get that happening. So now the shuffle starts to flatten out, and guess what? People like the groove, they get excited about it, and that starts to become the way that music is, because the kids are all digging it, just like every evolution. So this is a particular shuffle now where I literally take a two-handed shuffle and I flatten it out. I call this, surprise, surprise, the flattened out two-hand shuffle. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, now you can really start to hear that things are going to start sounding like rock and roll. You know, a lot of people, maybe you guys are thinking like, okay, well, this guy's talking about all these historical styles. That's nice, but I'm a modern drummer. I play modern music like rock. Okay, well, guess what? Rock uses a shuffle, right? What's the popular rock shuffle we all learned? Right, you guys all know that one, right? So another style that's really popular today, hip-hop, right? Everybody here knows about hip-hop, very popular. A lot of books and things written about it. Well, guess what? Around about the late 1960s, guys that were rhythm and blues drummers had been playing these shuffles, you know, for a long time. And they were like, let's, you know, see if we could do something different and change up the groove a little and make it, you know, a little different, a little more laid back maybe. So what they did was they took the bass drum off of beat 3, and they took the snare backbeats and put them on beat 3. So what you have is, if this is your typical shuffle, right? What we've been looking at. Well, now you've got this. 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, right? And if you speed that up a little bit, okay? Hip hop. And guess what? You still got that going on. So, you know, if you're into hip hop and you're into funk music, because, you know, Zora always says, well, funk music is just jazz with a halftime feel. And I would say it's just swing with a halftime feel. You know, you better have that swing together, right? That's still going on in hip-hop music. Let's talk about other kinds of music. How about reggae and ska music? Now, you guys are probably looking at me like, those guys are from Jamaica. That's reggae music. What do you mean shuffle, right? Well, guess what? Around about the early 1960s, the Jamaican guys had these shortwave radios or you know, even their little portable radios. They were picking up radio stations from Atlanta and New Orleans and Miami, and they were hearing American rhythm and blues. They were hearing Little Richard and that kind of stuff, and they were into it too because it's great music. So they started going up, buying records, bringing it back down to Jamaica, and a drummer named Lloyd Knibbs, who I like to call the father of Jamaican drumming, he basically took a shuffle and put it onto a drum set and fused it with the rhythms, the calypso and mento and buru and all these other ethnic rhythms they had going on there. And the way that he did it was he took the kick drum off of 1 and 3 and put it on the 2 and 4 along with the backbeats. So you have from this, right? Now you have this. You guys hearing that? Then the other thing he did was, remember we talked about the offbeats, that Texas shuffle, they put the emphasis on the offbeats. So you have this. Boom. That was called ska music, okay? And that became the most popular music in Jamaica at the time. As the 60s progressed, and I don't know what they were doing in Jamaica, but it made them real laid back, you know, what they do down there in Jamaica. But they started to lay this shuffle back even further. And eventually, you get to the end of the 60s, and you get what's called the reggae one drop. So you got this, you slow it down, you flatten it out, okay? But you still have that sense of bounce, that sense of swing. It still comes from a shuffle. So if you want to play, you know, how many No Doubt fans are there in the room? Guess what? They were influenced by reggae and ska. How many Stuart Copeland fans are in the room? Probably everybody in here. Guess what? The Police, you ever listen to their early records? Reggae, ska music. So, you know, a shuffle is at the heart of that again. Now, let's keep going. Country music. Okay, how many country fans we got here? I'm sure we got a bunch. Well, guess what? Country music didn't even have drums in it. It was an acoustic form of music, and they had guitars and, you know, fiddles and violins and upright bass and things, but they didn't want drums there. But around about the 1950s, rhythm and blues becomes popular, and, you know, they realize, hey, the younger generation, they want these rhythm and blues groups. So they say, okay, well, we'll let a drummer into the Nashville studios. So who do they let in? A guy named Buddy Harman, another friend of mine that I interviewed, the father of country drumming, okay? And they said, okay, you can come into the studios, but you got to bring brushes on a snare drum. That's it. That's all you get, right? Because they didn't want that drums stepping all over what, you know, the acoustic country music. Well, a few more years go by, they let Buddy have an actual drum set. But they said, you gotta still keep it quiet. So what did he do? He took a brush and a stick, cross stick, and he came up with what's called the country shuffle. And it's a very straight ahead, very right on top of the beat down the line groove, still swings, okay? And here's the country shuffle. That's it. But guess what? It's a shuffle. And it's at the heart of a ton of classic country. And if you want to go to Nashville, if you want to play country music, you better have your shuffle down. You better have your country shuffle down. And, you know, the shuffle became a big part of country. So the last track that I'm going to play along with today is another type of music that is on everybody's mind and is very hot right at the moment, and that is gospel music. Now, gospel music, it's another style that originally didn't even have drums. I mean, you know, nowadays it's like you talk about the church and everybody's got these, you know, big bands in church and these huge gospel choirs and all that kind of stuff. Well, it actually kind of seems a little weird, right? It's like drums in church? Think about that for a minute. You know, I mean, it's a little weird. Church is supposed to be a place where you get calm and you get zen. And, you know, you think about the great cathedrals of Europe. They didn't have drums in there. So artists like Ray Charles in the 1950s and Bobby Blue Bland, these guys took a bunch of gospel standards, spirituals, and they secularized them. Instead of it being about this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, it became this little girl of mine. And, you know, that music kind of started to become popular. So then there was more of an outcry. Hey, we got to get drums in church so it'll sound like this Ray Charles record we've been listening to. And suddenly the music started to seep over, and the double-time gospel feel, right? Because, you know, gospel had hand claps and they had tambourines. There was a lot of rhythm, especially in the black churches. And they would do these fast, you know, kind of double-time things that would put the spirit in you and get you really in a spiritual mode on a Sunday morning, so to speak. And so, you know, the drummers started playing these fast double-time type of grooves. And so those became very popular when rock and roll took off because it was fast and had this double-time feel. So the last track I'm going to play along with is, again, from the 1950s. And it's like a real honkin' saxophone kind of a thing. And when I first heard this music, I was like, they were playing music this intense in 1957? This sounds like, you know, double-time heavy metal to me. And I couldn't believe it. So again, you know, check it out. I'm just going to play the darn thing. Are you feeling the spirit? I'm going to play a short solo for you, and this solo is, what I'm going to do is take some of these ideas I've been talking about and kind of take it to the next level. It's going to combine a lot of different shuffle ideas, move the shuffle around, play some different things. And so what I would encourage you to do while you're watching this solo is, and by the way, this is in the last chapter of the book, we get into some more advanced, more contemporary kind of shuffle things that you may not want to do on your gig at the local blues bar. Use the first 3 chapters for that. But the last chapter, you know, some cool ideas that you can take and morph and do what you want with. So here's a short solo. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.